this is a book launch, and we're launching the new book, and I wrote it for three people, three types of people. I hope there's more than three. And it's for people who want to start their own businesses. And there's a lot. We were talking to somebody today, and she said, there's a lot more entrepreneurs interested in entrepreneurship today. And I said, well, there's actually been quite a bit for a long time. It's just that now people see the advertisement for Cadillac on TV all the time and hear the term garage entrepreneurs. But it's been known for quite a while. The second, and I spend most of my time helping small businesses grow into larger businesses. I was in Raleigh, Durham last Tuesday working with CEOs of companies who, most of them did 5, 10, maybe 50 million, and that is the future. There are no more jobs from large corporations. Now there's 40,000 firms in America, the very large ones, that account for 50% of all the employees. And mark my words, those firms cannot exist if they don't reduce employment in the US, because they live by earnings per share in large, and if their earnings don't, and you cannot grow earnings per share, if you're, I'm talking about 40, 50 million dollar corporations, not million, billion dollar corporations, you lose your job and every employee in the firm loses their job if they don't increase EPS, earnings per share, 5 to 10% a year or more. If somebody, Dave's on a lot of boards and so forth, if somebody said, oh, well, our revenues have been going up 1% a year, he is in the same place the president of Target, or Target, is in today, or JCPenney, or anybody else. Cannot survive. Well, you might say, well, they could just increase sales, do a good job. Not in the US or Europe or Canada. In North America and Europe, the era of growth is over. Nobody should ever expect very large corporations. I'm talking about Cardinal Health, Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, these kind of corporations. They cannot grow domestically because we don't have any more new people. And you might say, well, Roger, actually population is still growing in the US. Yes. What's the single reason population is still growing in the US? What's that? Immigration. No. It's people like some of us in this room. Longevity is the whole issue. And how many new, after 60, 65, and 8,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day. How many new cars, new homes, and new clothes do they need? They may need more health care, and they'll spend a lot on that, which will keep them from spending on some of the other things. So don't expect firms, big, huge corporations. And you might say, well, Roger, how about new products? And you know, I've taught my share of product life cycles. Well, the fact is, even if you have a big winner at Procter & Gamble, it's such a small percentage of the total that it doesn't move the needle on EPS. And you might say, well, couldn't they grow to other countries? Yes, they will grow to the BRICS nations. B stands for Brazil. R, Russia. I, India. C, China. And S,
South Africa.
South Africa, yeah. And really sub-Saharan Africa, actually. But how many new jobs does that create in the US? Not many. So where's the jobs going to come from? In fact, the statistics show, and do you realize how strange it is for me not to be pointing to a PowerPoint here? I have the projector. I could get it out. I gave my first presentation with PowerPoint last Friday night at the Columbus Country Club on the book, and I gave my first one to a larger CEO group, a Vistage group, Tuesday in Raleigh. And so I do have the PowerPoint if anybody wants to see it. But average income in the US is going up rapidly. And median household income is going down, or at least it's stagnant. It's not going to go increase. And anybody who says, well, what are we going to do to get the GDP growing in this country is naive. It's tempting to use a stronger word, like idiot or foolish or something. I didn't. I said naive. Because you cannot expect GDP to grow much in the future because you have to know what caused it to grow in the past. In the past, GDP grew mainly in the US at rapid rates because people moved from the farm to the city and bought stuff which is counted in GDP, that they used to produce at home, like childcare and food and clothing. Then in the 70s and 80s, they did, all those people moved to the city. 8% of married women had a job outside the home. Today it's 80%. And everything, like 5% of our food was spent outside the home 30 years ago. Now it's 50% and going up. And Rob Lindemann and several people here are glad of that. In fact, is Todd Barnum still here? Yeah. We're glad that it has happened, hasn't it? And in the restaurant business, that's one of the reasons. And so where are the jobs going to come from? And the answer is, do not expect jobs to come from large corporations in the U.S. Now, profits will come by large corporations to business in other countries. Unless those the only way they're going to get increased profits in the U.S., if you're Chase Bank, what's the only way you can, in the U.S., get increased profits?
Raise the rate.
Except you can't really do that because of competition. You're going to cut costs. And what's the primary cost you're going to cut? Labor. And healthcare makes it one of the highest labor costs in the world. Jack?
Roger, if the large companies are not going to create jobs.
I pray that you say, who is?
No. I know who is. I just hired somebody to cut my grass today.
Okay.
So it's me. No. But if the large companies aren't going to create jobs, it's a myth then to say that if these large corporations repatriate the $1 trillion or so that have parked in foreign accounts, that it's going to create new jobs.
New jobs, you're right, absolutely. Yeah. Now, there's not much incentive to bring the profits. In fact, what are the biggest corporations doing with their corporate headquarters today because of the profit situation? Offshore. You know, why would a big corporation stay in America when you can buy a European, that's what's happening right now, buy a European corporation and move your headquarters to Europe where the taxes are lower? And that's a smart thing to do. So if you expect large corporations to increase employment, you're naive. Increasing unemployment, yes. Tom?
How about telling them about the latest female billionaire?
Sarah Blakely. And you know, you make more money, you don't make much money inventing things. There's a myth. Oh, if you invent things, you make money. Well, what did Bill Gates invent? Nothing. He bought DOS for $50,000. What did Steve Jobs invent? Nothing. He invented the mouse. People say, no, he got that from Xerox. The people who invent things rarely, and there's exceptions, but rarely make money. The people who perfect somebody else's idea, like the Bill Gateses and Steve Jobs of the world. And Sarah Blakely, she reinvented a product called
Spanx.
Her new product is Spanx. Her old product was called Girdles, okay? And she reinvented that. And how much capital did she raise from the venture capitalists? 0. And she has no debt. And that is really one of the major themes of this book. What is the reason, and this is going to be the controversial chapter, the reason most entrepreneurs fail is TMC. There's a whole chapter on it. Too much capital. Because that allows entrepreneurs to focus on the investors instead of their customers, and they never learn what the customers want to buy until they burn through all the capital and the firm's gone. And this happens all the time. Webvan is the biggest, best or worst example, depending on in here. $1 billion. The firms that get a lot of capital almost always go bankrupt. And the reason is because they're not undercapitalized. People say that, oh, I was just undercapitalized. No, they're overexpensed. And I have a person who wanted to be here tonight, but he couldn't, who has put $5.5 million into his business, and I think it will probably go under within the next 2 or 3 months. And the reason is because he never learned why people buy the product. And he's got a great product, and it's a technology firm. If he could just sell more of it, 70 or 80% of every dollar he took in would go to the bottom line because he's got fixed costs, except that he doesn't know how to market because he doesn't know why people buy it. The E is much easier in the e-commerce than the commerce part. That is the theme of one of the other books. Well, anyway, these are the kinds of ideas that you get from this. The answer, Jack, do me and say, okay, if the big corporations are not going to create jobs, who is? And the answer is,
If the big corporations aren't going to create jobs, who is?
oh, I'm glad you asked that. And the answer is entrepreneurs. Official studies by SBA and so forth put it at 67% of all net new jobs are from small firms. We're talking 50 and under employees. And Kaufman studies and some others put it at more like 80 and 90%. Don't expect anybody to be prosperous in the future if they don't have a PhD or an MD or a JD just because they're working for somebody else. Not going to happen. Highly educated, yes. But the only people who are going to be prosperous, who are going to go from the lower middle class to the upper middle class, are those who start their own business. Person who mows my lawn makes well over $100,000 a year. Anybody can make $100,000 to $150,000 a year mowing lawns if they know how to run a business. And that's why we wrote a book that shows some of the principles they need to know. What does an over-the-road truck driver make these days? 70, 80,000. If you can get them, because it's almost impossible to hire anybody to work in a factory or over-the-road truck driver. We have nobody who will take those jobs. And an over-the-road truck driver, you got to have two things to be that. You got to have a CDL and a clean UA. And that excludes a whole lot of people. Urine analysis is. Sure, Jim.
For those of us that have children approaching college, maybe upon graduating from college, thinking about their career, what can you advise? How can you advise us?
Well, if they got a degree in sociology from MIT, they're probably going to certainly have a much lower starting salary than if they get a CDL from NIT, National Institute of Transportation. Okay? They teach CDLs. Honestly, there was a ROI. College degrees in general do make more money than non-college, but not always in specifics. I have a list of 10 jobs that pay over $100,000 a year with only a GED. Okay, air traffic controller, for example, pastry chef. What's that? Plumbers, electricians. The plumbers. If you can do something that people need done, you can make 100,000 up. Did Rhett Reichert get here? Or Rhett was coming, but he had another thing. But you know, I work with a lot of auto dealers, and I can tell you that almost every auto dealer has 2 or 3 or more salespeople making well over 100,000, 150, 200,000. I have a nephew who is a welder, and I met my nephew in Morgantown, and he is making a lot of money now because he learned how to weld. Good welders, maybe read in Business Week just 2 weeks ago, $300,000. I know people with PhDs who don't make $300,000 here. A whole lot of them, actually. But somebody had a question, yeah.
Roger, I got 3 young kids. What's higher education going to look like in about 15 years? How do I prepare them? How do I prepare for that?
Well, if they're going to schools like Urbana, they're going to be absorbed by schools like Franklin. There is the equivalent of the F word in universities is the P word, productivity. Nobody's ever talked about it until recently. And the only reason they're talking about it now is used to you could just raise the tuition high, nobody cared. They cared, but they would pay it. And that's why tuition has gone up much faster than even health care. Well, now they're beginning to care and say, no, I'm going to go where it's cheaper. And there are people putting together, I just read about this young woman who's put together an MBA, a good MBA, from free courses at other MBA schools. Now, she charges something to do that, but is Chris still here? What's the executive MBA cost?
Oh my gosh.
Maybe, I don't want to embarrass you, but $95,000, okay? And it's so good. It's really one of the best in the world, and people will pay that. But if you are, and I don't want to be disparaging, but if you are in lesser known schools, and I was going to mention a few local ones, they're not going to pay that. And those schools are under such a big push that they have to get the cost down. And the only way to do that is to increase productivity. And that's eventually going to force other schools to enhance productivity within the schools. And Tom Goldsby had me talk to one of the groups of PhD students one time, and I told him, you know, when I was teaching, nobody cared whether your cost per teaching hour was $30 or $300. It doesn't matter. You don't look at things like that. Do you look at things like that these days? Don't answer. But that's where it's going to go, and that's the only way when parents or others stop paying that, and the for-profits are leading the way on that. But what's going to happen is for lots of nonprofit schools, my daughter went to Otterbein, schools like that, I don't see how they'll survive in the future. Urbanas and stuff like that, they'll be absorbed and merged just like inefficient small firms do. The efficient, highly productive firms absorb the others. And that's what's going to happen, and that will eventually level off the cost. And we've also had such a dominant position worldwide. Our universities were the best in the world, and I think they still are, but they're losing that edge. Not because we're worse, but because the standard's rising all over the world. And that'll change things too. So anyway, that's what this book is about. Entrepreneurs saving America. And if you don't have a copy, I have, I think, ample copies here. Please take one with my compliments. I'd be glad to sign it if you want me to. I like to sign books because that way you can't sell them back to the bookstores. Yeah. Actually, they're called collectibles on Amazon, and Amazon doesn't. Yeah, they are worth more sometimes. Jim Head is standing right there. Put your hand up, Jim. Jim is the publisher. This publisher is Union Hill Publishers from Birmingham, Alabama, and he and his lovely Suzanne drove all the way from Birmingham today, right, to be here. And he can handle quantity discounts for suitable quantities for anybody who, one of my best students told me he was halfway through the book and ordered 15 copies more for his managers, and I hope that is what happens. We're launching, this is a book launch, but I have to tell you that it wouldn't have happened without my partner, Linda. And I consider this kind of a relaunch of my life, our life. We jumped the broom. We jumped the broom last September, and if you don't know what that term means, I have a few friends here who can explain that to you later. But you know, she said, "Will you talk if I do everything else?" And so, you know, I said, "Sure." She really did everything else, and I appreciate it so much. I am so fortunate, and it's kind of a relaunch. You know, I have had some tough times in the past, and Rocky Balboa says, "It's not how many times you get knocked down on the canvas; it's how many times you get back up." And so, I'm back up.
Yes. Thank you. That's sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, if you don't have a book, please get one, and I'll be happy to sign it. There is. Oh, you know what? I forgot to plug in the coffee. You got it? Okay, good. There is Crimson Cup coffee. Do y'all know the story of Crimson Cup? It's a local firm, entrepreneur, Greg Hubert, who wanted to be here tonight, but he couldn't be here because he's in Nicaragua selecting coffee. That's what he does. Their coffee is so much better than Starbucks. It's in the top 1% of coffees in the world. It's amazing. And he goes to Nicaragua and Ethiopia and places like that and gets it. And we have Armando's blend here tonight, and we have decaf, but I didn't turn the one on upstairs either. So upstairs, in 10 minutes, we'll have some decaf. But is Cheryl here? Cheryl Kruger was coming. Earlier today, she told me there was some problem, but anyway, she started a little cookie company, and we have her cookies over here, including a Jim Trestle, who I admire, cookie thing holder. And as you probably noticed, we have had White Castle Lisa Ingram is a Fisher grad, and some people accuse me of writing this book about as a publicity gimmick for Columbus, because there are a lot of Columbus firms in it, and several of them are Ohio State grads, and that's okay. But please enjoy a Cheryl's cookie and coffee when we get it, and we have Frosties from there. Lindsay, are you still here? Yeah. Do we get the coupons? I have them. Won't you pass them around to everybody?
Also by the coffee, and there's some upstairs as well.
Okay, Lindsay Jack works at Wendy's, and she got everybody can get a coupon for a deal at Wendy's, and there's probably more Frosties upstairs too, I think. So get one of those. Anybody have any pressing questions about the book or anything?
Not about the book, but it's so much harder to get started now than it was 30 years ago because different regulations, different requirements. If you start a business, you're going to be breaking the law.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
You just do it out of ignorance because you just don't have time when you're little to do all that stuff.
Well, that's a good question, and I'll tell you this. As entrepreneurs, you have to do it all. You really have to. And I could give you an example, and it would be a person you know from here in Columbus. Many of you would know him. And he had one of the finest, most creative firms, a retail operation, and I told him, you haven't got financial control. And he said, I have a bookkeeper to do that. I said, if you don't understand those books, you will go broke. And he said, well, I don't like that. And he was a very creative person. He said, I just don't have any accounting, bookkeeping, I don't care for. You will fail as an entrepreneur if you don't understand accounting. And I actually encouraged him to go to Franklin and take an accounting course. And he didn't. And he went bankrupt. He doesn't live in Columbus anymore. And I won't mention his name, of course, but you got to do everything. Now, as you grow, you have to learn to delegate. One of the persons I worked with was Michael Dell. And Michael told me, and he's lectured at Fisher College, and he told me that, he started in his dorm room. And when I talk about garage entrepreneurs, I don't always mean garages. Cheryl Kruger's garage was a kitchen, okay? And Michael Dell's was, as many are today, university dorm rooms and so forth. And then he moved to a garage his first year after his freshman year in college. And he said, one day I was driving to work, and I realized I had the keys, and I was a little late that day, and I knew none of my employees could get in because I was the only one that had the keys to the garage. He said, that's when I learned I got to delegate. And so after you get past one person, you do have to delegate, but you still have to understand every single aspect. It doesn't mean you have to do it all. And you got to bring people in. And as you grow, one of my favorite chapters in here is the one on You Win with People. I thought that was a very original title. And incidentally, those are Ohio State books over there. Some of them are written by Ohio State people, including Oliver McGee. Do you all know Oliver McGee? First black drum major at Ohio State. His book is over there. If you're a Democrat, you're not allowed to read that book, however, because you won't like it. He worked in the Obama administration, but he didn't stay there. The book is called Jumping the Aisle. But anyway, if you really look at all these sorts of things, and we teach courses on entrepreneurship, but one of the problems is you've got to teach so many things. And as a professor, you can never be very highly regarded as a publisher because in academia, you win the go from associate or even non-tenured position to full by publishing articles on increasingly specific topics that very few, if any, people read. Okay. Chris, am I terribly wrong about that? But I don't know whether you all noticed, inequality is everywhere, including academia. Chronicle of Higher Education just a couple weeks ago had an article about the rising gap between associates and fulls. Okay, the rich are getting richer and the poor aren't getting poorer, they're just not getting rich very fast compared to full professors. The gap has almost doubled since 2000. And that's true in everything, whether it's medical or law or everything else. The people who are really competent are going to make more and more and more and more in the future, whether they're an entrepreneur or a physician or a professor. And the people who aren't able to do what other people want are going to get less relative One of the points I try to make in the book is every once in a while you hear people say, oh, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Ever heard any people say that? Half true, half true. The rich are getting richer very rapidly in this country. But the poor are getting richer also. They're just not doing it very, very fast, and they're staying about the same. So the gap is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and I guarantee you inequality is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's a major problem. And if we don't save America by letting some of the poor people become prosperous, we're in trouble. And I work some with people who have felonies in their background, and they can't get jobs very frequently. I got an email from a friend today. He's a really competent person, can't get a job. And I know that quite well myself. And I started teaching courses in Morgantown on entrepreneurship. And my supervisor, a woman named Miss Hayes, I taught GED courses mostly, but she asked me to teach courses, develop a course on how to get a job when you get out of prison. And I did. And we had employers from all over West Virginia and Southern Pennsylvania come in. We did mock interviews. I helped the GED students figure out how to do an interview. We did mock interviews, and then we had real employers come in and interview them. I did resumes. It was the only way I could get to use the computer. Yeah, I'll do the resumes, Miss Hayes, be glad to do that, and so forth. And here's what they said. They said, Blackwell, I have a felony conviction. Nobody's going to give me a job. And I said to them, you're probably right. Now, there are firms that will. Prejudice is not everybody is prejudiced against ex-offenders, but IBM and some firms like that actively look for people who are ex-offenders because they'll be more loyal employees, they found, and actually better employees than people who don't have it. But here's what I said to them. You're right. Nobody's probably going to give you a job, so you got to give one to yourself by starting your own business. And then they said, how do I do that? Well, this is the result of some of those questions. And I might tell you, when I was in Morgantown, I ran 5 miles a day, but only when you could get on the track. And you could only do that in the daylight. And so in the winter, you know, they had stand-up count at 3:30, and you can't go back till after dinner, so it's 6 or 7 before you can go on the track. And if there's not enough light for the cameras, you can't be on the track. And there's a quarter-mile inside sidewalk, and they couldn't, you can't run any place, and you can't congregate more than 3 people in one place. That's against the rules, and you learn to obey the rules. But as long as you're walking, they don't care how many people are walking together. So every night after dinner, during the winter months at least, I couldn't run, so I just walked. I walked 20 laps, a quarter mile, 5 miles every night, and gradually a group of guys would follow me around and ask questions. And I didn't really know the meaning of this word, but I began to get 6 or 7, then 8, and then 10 or 12. This is called a posse. And they said, oh, that's Blackwell's posse. And they were asking me questions about how to get a job and math and faith. Some of the guys, one of the Muslim guys really wanted to know what it meant to be a Christian and all these sorts of things. And one of the people who came and visited me in prison was Rabbi Kaltman. He had one of his own congregation there, and so he could come over and sneak in a visit with me. That's not against the rules, is it? It's kosher. It's kosher. But anyway, I had a posse, and I loved it. And they were, you know, my students were 80, 90% African-American students, and these were young men who taught me all kinds of things I didn't know. And I taught them whatever I could about anything, and they were my posse. So I want to hereby deputize everybody in this room to be my posse and go out and tell the world about this book, because that's the way books are sold today, is word of mouth. And I appreciate you coming tonight, and stick around as long. There's plenty of Charles Shaw wine, which I write about in the book. Thank you.
But I have a comment. Just like you mentioned, I never considered the legal aspect of starting now, but I know that 30 years from before, how do you start a business? There's so many books out there. Okay, Facebook's done, Google's done, Apple's done, Dell's done. How do you be the next successful person?
You go to China and do Alibaba.
But Alibaba is well exhausted. Okay, so I picked up this book, on skepticism, and thought, okay, maybe it's another one. But you know what? I couldn't put it down. And I thank you, Roger, for touching my life.
Well, thank you,
Um,
Eileen.
I'm not adopted, but I did grow up with the bucket system where there's no flush. And my mom told me, if you don't go to school, you marry the guy who drives the van with 36 doors. That's the guy who picks up the buckets. Not a limo driver. And that's my dad, he remembers. And after reading this book, I appreciate my family so much more. My dad, who's given me all the values, and now I appreciate it so much more. But your book gave me so much inspiration that I thought, what else could I do? Everything is done. I can't be special. You made me feel like I could be special in my own way. And I've been telling everybody about this book. If you pick it up, you won't be able to drop it down. So Roger, thank you so much for
Well, thank
changing
you,
my
Eileen.
life. To Roger.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming. Stick around as long as you can.
Thank you.
Okay.
What?